Imagine traveling, like 5,000 miles, spending thousands of dollars, carefully curating this massive list of
Oh,
coordinates.
right, the ultimate itinerary.
Yeah, exactly. And you finally stand in the center of one of the world's most revered Zen rock gardens. And you just feel, well, absolutely nothing.
Oh, man. That is such a common experience, actually.
Right. And it's not because the garden itself is, flawed or anything. It's because you brought this totally frantic, optimization-obsessed energy of modern travel into a space that was explicitly designed for total stillness.
You're trying to conquer the map. We treat travel like it's a competitive sport now.
We really do.
Yeah.
But today on this deep dive, we're attempting something, well, much more difficult than just following a packed itinerary. We're exploring a city that fiercely resists that modern impulse.
It really does. It requires a complete recalibration of how we even measure a successful trip. The source material we're pulling from today, it's this incredibly detailed guide.
Yeah, Kyoto Travel Guide. What to Know, Where to Go, and How to Experience It Properly by Yvonne Jr. Blanchette of ARI Voyages.
Right. And it functions way less like a standard list of restaurant recommendations and more like, an instruction manual on how to perceive a physical space.
Which is such a wild concept for a travel guide. The whole premise here is that Kyoto isn't just a geographic location with, a high density of old buildings.
No, not at all.
It's a city that actively demands a completely different way of traveling. Like, if you don't adjust your internal pacing to match its environment, the city just remains completely opaque to you.
You'll see the buildings, but you won't actually experience Kyoto.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we can even chart out the specific neighborhoods or which temples to visit, we have to look at the underlying philosophy of Kyoto.
Spatial and temporal philosophy.
Yeah, exactly. And the fastest way to understand what Kyoto is to look at what it intentionally chooses not to be.
And the inevitable point of contrast there is always Tokyo. They sit on the same island. They're connected by just a 2.5-hour bullet train ride on the Shinkansen, but they operate on fundamentally opposing paradigms.
They really do. Tokyo is, the current administrative and financial center. It's always looking outward and forward.
It's pure momentum, but Kyoto was the imperial capital of Japan for over a millennium.
1,000 years. That's just wild to think about.
Right. When a city holds the epicenter of culture, politics, and religion for that long, it develops this kind of cultural bedrock. It doesn't need to shout to prove its relevance anymore.
Already proven it.
Exactly. The density of history there is just staggering. We're talking over 1,600 Buddhist temples, hundreds of Shinto shrines, and these entire districts of preserved wooden architecture.
I really want to frame that contrast geographically, too, because it completely changes how you physically move through the space.
Oh, the verticality versus horizontality?
Yes. Think about it. Tokyo is a city built vertically. It constantly draws your eyes upward, right? To the skyscrapers, the layered highways, the massive neon screens everywhere.
It pulls your attention outward into the future.
Yeah, exactly. But Kyoto, conversely, is built horizontally. The architecture, the gardens, the really narrow lanes, they force your eyes downward.
You find yourself looking at, the moss growing on a stone.
Or the swept patterns in the gravel. Or just the intricate joinery of the wooden floorboards you're walking on.
It's a totally different sensory diet. One environment demands this massive sensory consumption, and the other forces you to look down at the present moment.
It forces you to just be there.
And that physical geometry directly influences your psychological state as a visitor. The author encapsulates this perfectly in the guide's core thesis. They state, what makes Kyoto different from other culturally significant cities is not the quantity of what it holds, but the way it holds it.
The way it holds it. That's a great line.
It really is, because, every European capital has historic districts and old cathedrals, but the energy in Kyoto is focused on precision and intentionality.
It's all in the details.
Exactly. It's the sweeping of the path. It's this specific shadow that's cast by a paper lantern. It's the rigorous daily maintenance of what looks like a totally natural landscape, but is actually meticulously controlled.
But let me push the perspective of the average traveler here for a second.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm visiting Japan, I have, a limited number of days. I have a finite budget.
Right. The pressure is on.
Yeah. My instinct is to maximize my return on investment. I want to see Kinkaikuji, the Bamboo Grove, Fushimi Inari, and Gion, and I ideally want to do it all in 48 hours.
A highlight reel.
Right. How am I supposed to override that very natural human instinct to consume as much of the destination as possible? It feels totally counterintuitive to travel across the globe just to, like, sit on a wooden veranda and stare at a single rock.
Well, you have to completely redefine what return on investment actually means in this specific context.
Okay, how so?
In a city like Tokyo or New York, ROI might genuinely be measured in volume, right? Like how many neighborhoods you absorbed, how much diverse input you gathered.
How many boxes you check?
Exactly. But in Kyoto, the ROI is measured entirely in depth of observation.
Depth, not breadth.
Yes. If you rush through a Zen garden solely to secure a photograph that proves you were there, you haven't actually engaged with the garden at all.
You just use it as a backdrop.
Right. The space exists to facilitate a shift in your internal state. And if you refuse to slow down enough to let that shift occur, the transaction is just empty. You paid the admission fee, but you received nothing of actual value in return.
That is such a harsh but necessary reality check.
It is. The author is explicitly warning us that expecting an immediate, overwhelming spectacle will cause you to miss the profound cultural sensibility that's quietly operating right in front of you.
It really highlights the difference between collecting locations and actually experiencing them. You're either a rusher trying to conquer the map, or you're a lingerer willing to let the environment dictate the terms of the engagement.
And Kyoto heavily favors the lingerer.
Heavily. And because of that, the specific neighborhoods you choose to spend time in and how you approach them matter immensely. The guide directs us to look really closely at the city's eastern districts to see this preserved philosophy in action.
Yeah, the eastern edge of the city. It's nestled right against the mountains. It holds the highest concentration of what people typically imagine when they picture, traditional Japan.
And the absolute epicenter of that preservation is Gion.
Gion is iconic.
It is. It's the geographic and cultural anchor for a very specific era of history. You're walking down these stone-paved lanes bordered by machiya.
Those are the traditional wooden townhouses, right?
Yeah, they completely define the aesthetic of the area. They have these incredibly narrow facades facing the street, but they stretch really deep back into the block.
Oh, like the eel beds, they call them.
Exactly. And they often hide these stunning internal courtyard gardens that were designed to pull a breeze through the house during the brutal, humid summers.
Brilliant architecture.
And then lining the exterior of these machiya are the red paper lanterns. It's also, of course, the most famous of Kyoto's Hanamachi, or geisha districts. It's where you might actually see a maiko or a fully fledged gaiko heading to an appointment.
And the guide points visitors specifically toward Hanamikoji Street and the Shirakawa Canal.
The canal is so incredibly evocative. It's lined with weeping willow trees and these wooden dining rooms that literally overhang the water.
It's stunning. But it's really crucial to recognize that Gion is not a dormant architectural relic.
Right, it's not a museum.
Exactly, it's not a museum. It is a highly active, incredibly elite economic zone. Behind those sliding wooden doors are some of the most exclusive, high-end restaurants in the city. Places that require formal introductions or, advanced bookings months ahead of time.
Moving just south and east from Gion, the terrain starts to elevate into the hills of Higashiyama, and the geometry of the streets completely changes.
You're suddenly navigating these narrow, stone-paved lanes that just climb right up the hillside.
Yeah, and they're heavily populated by ancient temples, very old tea houses, and these multi-generational artisans.
The artisans are amazing. We're talking about small workshops dedicated entirely to, hand-thrown ceramics, meticulous lacquerware, or highly specific textile dyeing techniques.
And at the very apex of this district sits Kimizudera.
The massive wooden temple.
Massive. It has that iconic wooden stage jutting out over the forested hillside. And you reach it by walking up these preserved historic streets like Ninenzaka and Sanenzaka.
What's fascinating here is that the proximity of these artisan workshops to the high-end dining of Gion illustrates a really critical point from the text.
How so?
Well, this area doesn't function as a theme park. It's not an open-air museum where traditions are merely displayed behind glass for tourists. It's living history.
Oh, I see. They rely on each other.
Exactly. The chefs down in Gion literally require the immaculate ceramics produced up in Higashiyama to serve their kaiseki meals.
So the traditions survive because they're still actively producing excellence that the local culture demands. The economy of the preservation is actively turning.
It's a living ecosystem.
But the reality of visiting Kiyomizu-dera or the Shirakawa Canal today often involves navigating through, thousands of other tourists.
Yeah, the crowds can be intense.
It is incredibly difficult to appreciate the living history of a delicate ceramic bowl or the shadow of a willow tree when you're literally shoulder to shoulder with tour groups. If the environment demands a quiet, contemplative mindset, but the physical reality of the street is absolute gridlock. The traveler is trapped.
And this is where the guide introduces the single most vital piece of tactical advice for Kyoto: temporal strategy.
Temporal strategy. I love that phrasing.
It's essential. You cannot conquer Kyoto through sheer willpower. You have to outmaneuver it using time. And Gion and Higashiyama actually require entirely opposite temporal approaches.
Okay, break that down for me.
For Gion, the author stresses that the district is best experienced on foot in the early evening.
That makes architectural sense, actually. The Mashiya are meant to be seen when the harsh daytime sun drops. The long shadows obscure any of the modern intrusions, and those paper lanterns provide all the illumination.
Plus, the daytime tour buses usually depart before dinner.
Right. So the atmosphere completely transforms at dusk. But Higashiyama demands the exact inverse of that strategy, right?
Exactly the inverse. To experience the preserved streets of Ninanzaka and Senanzaka as they were historically intended, which is as quiet, contemplative pathways leading pilgrims up to a sacred site, you absolutely must arrive at dawn.
Dawn. Not just morning, dawn.
Dawn. Arriving at noon means wading through a sea of distraction and selfie sticks. Arriving at 6:30 in the morning means the shops are closed, sure, but you can actually hear the sound of your own footsteps on the stone.
Oh, wow.
You can see the morning mist just sitting in the valley below Kimazu-dera.
You're essentially using an alarm clock to strip away the modern era.
That's a perfect way to put it.
So we have this highly structured wooden preservation on the east side. The guide then directs our attention to the west and the south, where Kyoto's cultural history is deeply intertwined with its natural geography.
But the necessity of that temporal strategy we just talked about, it becomes even more severe in these areas.
Oh, absolutely. Let's look at the western district of Arashiyama. It sits right at the base of the mountains, and it's globally recognized almost entirely for one single feature.
The bamboo grove.
The bamboo grove,
Oh.
which is honestly a victim of its own photogenic nature. You have these towering, impossibly thick green stalks swaying in the wind, creating this acoustic and visual canopy that feels almost otherworldly.
It's stunning in photos, but the guide is very, very explicit about the trap of Arashiyama.
The trap.
Because of the intense global fame of that grove, the main paved path running right through the center of it is perpetually saturated with crowds.
Right.
The text warns that if you only walk that central artery, your experience will be primarily one of frustration. You'll just be dodging people.
So what's the strategy the author advocates?
You have to push past the immediate lure. The actual value of Arashiyama lies in the wider landscape. You need to move toward the wide, slow-moving Oi River. Seek out the smaller hillside temples scattered further up the slopes, and just navigate the quiet residential lanes that connect them all.
The text highlights Tenryuji in this area too, which is a UNESCO-listed Zen temple with a garden that has survived for centuries in its original form.
Yeah, the garden is incredible.
But again, you can't perceive the subtleties of a Zen garden if there are literally hundreds of people talking loudly right behind you. The garden utilizes a technique called shakai, or borrowed scenery, which incorporates the distant mountains into the design of the immediate landscape.
And that requires complete visual and auditory calm to appreciate.
Which naturally brings us to the southern district of Fushimi, and specifically Fushimi Inari Taisha. This is perhaps the most visually aggressive site in all of Kyoto.
Oh, for sure. The thousands of bright vermilion torii gates winding their way miles up a densely forested mountain.
The sheer volume of the gates is just overwhelming. But the text points out something really fascinating about the geography of that specific site.
The filter effect.
Yes. The lower sections, the entrance, and the first few heavy tunnels of gates are just absolute gridlock all day long. But as the path starts to really climb the mountain, the crowds thin out dramatically.
The physical exertion of the climb acts as a natural geographic filter.
Exactly. You literally have to pay in sweat and legwork to access the genuinely atmospheric, spiritual quiet at the higher elevations.
It is a brilliant architectural and geographical design. The mountain itself actively separates the casual observer from the dedicated traveler.
The further you ascend, the more the density of tourists drops, until you are left walking through these vermilion tunnels with literally only the sound of the wind through the forest.
It's magical. However, even with that physical filter in place, the author still insists on applying the overarching timing rule to all these locations.
Okay, let's clearly define this timing rule, because it really is the linchpin of the entire travel guide.
It is. The text states that peak capacity at all these popular sites, places like Kinkakuji, Kiyomizu-dera, and Fushimi Inari hits maximum density between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m.
So right in the middle of the day.
Right. And to avoid this, the absolute mandate is the pre-8 a.m. start.
Pre-8 a.m.
The guide notes that arriving at these world-famous sites before 8 a.m. renders them almost private.
And here's where it gets really interesting to me. It's not just a logistical hack to, get a clean shot for Instagram without people in the background.
No, not at all.
The requirement to wake up before dawn and arrive at a temple right as the heavy wooden gates open forces the traveler into a state of physical and mental discipline.
Oh, I love that framing.
Right. The effort required to drag yourself out of a warm bed at 5:30 in the morning completely mirrors the intentionality required to understand the city itself.
Yeah.
You are proving to the space that you are willing to work for the experience.
That is a crucial insight. Structuring a day around pre-dawn starts is a fundamental act of respect for the nature of the sites. You cannot grasp the spiritual weight of a mountain shrine or the deliberate asymmetry of a dry landscape garden when you are actively engaged in a battle for physical space. The timing rule is the key that unlocks the true essence of Kyoto.
But, there's a danger in spending your entire trip just chasing this ethereal, silent perfection of the mountainsides. You risk treating Kyoto like it's just an untouched, silent museum.
Right, you miss the actual city.
Exactly. To understand the city completely, you have to look at what fuels it. You have to come down to the valley floor, into the gritty, earthy reality of the ground level. And the source takes us from the spiritual heights straight into downtown Kyoto and Nishiki Market.
It is a totally necessary counterbalance. Kyoto is not solely a city of ascetic monks and silent aesthetics. It is a functioning, hungry metropolis.
Very hungry.
And Nishiki Market, which is often referred to as Kyoto's kitchen, is this narrow, heavily covered arcade running for several blocks right through the center of the city.
The sensory shift is violent in the best possible way.
Yeah.
You spend the morning in the absolute acoustic control of a tea room, and then you just plunge into Nishiki.
That's chaos.
Total chaos. It's loud, it's damp, it smells of roasting tea, grilled seafood, and brine. You have vendors shouting over each other, displaying these massive wooden barrels of fermented local vegetables, slabs of fresh tofu, glistening fish, and highly specialized local ingredients that have been sold from those exact stalls for generations.
And the market is surrounded by the broader downtown commercial districts of Kawaramachi and Shijo. This area holds the densest concentration of restaurants, modern cafes, and retail shops.
It's a huge contrast.
Huge.
Yeah.
You might find a store selling 400-year-old handcrafted knives sitting directly adjacent to a massive neon-lit modern department store.
The inclusion of this downtown area in the guide is so vital because travel shouldn't just be an exercise in, hushed spiritual reverence.
No, it should be fun, too.
Right. It is fundamentally about the tactile joy of eating hot street food off a bamboo skewer while standing in an alleyway, or tasting some bizarrely colored pickled vegetable you can't even identify.
From a structural perspective, this ground-level engagement prevents the traveler from romanticizing the city into abstraction.
And that's a good point.
Nishiki Market forces you to interact with the daily, sustaining lifeblood of Kyoto's citizens. The grand temples represent the monumental history of the imperial past, sure, but the market represents the immediate present.
So if you only visit the temples, your understanding of Kyoto is completely incomplete. You're entirely disconnected from the reality of the people who actually live there today.
Exactly.
So the geography really sets the stage. We understand the preserved East, the natural integration of the West and South, and the commercial heartbeat of the center.
But the source material makes a really profound leap here.
Yes, it does. Walking through these neighborhoods and just observing them is still essentially passive. You're still keeping the city at arm's length.
You're still a spectator.
Right. To truly comprehend Kyoto, the guide insists you must let its traditions physically envelop you. We have to move from just observing to actually immersing.
The transition from what to see to how to exist within the space. And the text identifies the ryokan as the absolute pinnacle of this physical immersion.
Okay, when we say ryokan, we are talking about a traditional Japanese inn.
Right.
And the aesthetic features are very distinct. You have rooms floored entirely with woven tatami mats, sliding paper screens, sleeping on a futon that is unrolled onto the floor in the evening, and bathing in an onsen, which is a communal hot spring bath.
And the meals.
Oh, the meals.
Yeah.
Usually kaiseki. An incredibly elaborate multi-course dining experience that dictates exactly what you eat based on the extreme micro-season. The guide claims that even a single night in a ryokan fundamentally changes the texture of the entire trip.
It is a massive claim, but honestly, it is entirely accurate. Kyoto possesses some of the most historically significant and meticulously maintained ryokans in the entire country.
I really want to dig into the mechanics of why this matters, though. Why does changing where I sleep transform my cultural understanding?
Well, think about what a normal hotel does.
Right, when you stay in a standardized Western-style hotel in Kyoto, you're essentially establishing a safe, familiar base camp. You venture out to look at Japan during the day, but you retreat to a globalized, frictionless environment at night.
You sleep on an elevated mattress, you sit on a regular chair, you control the climate with a thermostat.
You're just a spectator watching a play, but you always get to retreat to the green room.
This raises an important question about the issue with standard tourism. It is entirely performative. A ryokan, conversely, demands participatory immersion.
It strips away all your familiar physical comforts.
It does. It forces you to conform to Japanese domestic rhythms and their specific spatial logic. The moment you step into the genkan, the entryway, you must remove your shoes, which immediately changes your physical connection to the floor.
You feel the ground differently.
And the scent of the tatami reed permeates the air. Because you are sitting on cushions and sleeping on a futon, your eye level is drastically lowered.
Everything is designed for that lower perspective.
Exactly. The architecture of the room, the placement of the hanging scroll in the alcove, the view out the low window into the courtyard garden, all of it is explicitly designed to be viewed from the floor, not from a standing position or sitting high up in a chair.
It literally alters your physical relationship with gravity and architecture.
It really does.
And then the kaiseki dinner forces this total surrender of choice. You don't order from a menu. You are served. What the chef has determined is at the exact peak of its season that very day.
You trust the chef completely.
And the onsen requires you to navigate this deeply cultural, often very vulnerable practice of communal bathing, adhering to super strict etiquette regarding cleanliness and modesty. It is an orchestrated, inescapable cultural environment.
That concept of active surrender perfectly bridges into the next immersive practice highlighted by the text, which is shado, or the Japanese tea ceremony.
The guide describes the tea ceremony as one of the most highly condensed expressions of traditional Japanese values.
It's intense.
This is far, far beyond the act of simply drinking a bowl of whisked matcha. It is a highly formalized, centuries-old ritual. The text emphasizes precision, intense restraint, obsessive attention to detail, and a demanding level of mindful presence.
The choreography of chado is rigid. Every single movement, how the host purifies the bamboo scoop with a silk cloth, how the ceramic bowl is rotated before drinking, exactly how the hot water is poured, has a philosophical, often Zen-derived underpinning.
It's a meditation in motion.
It's an exercise in stripping away all the extraneous noise to focus entirely on the present interaction. And the guide notes that participating in this ceremony, especially in the historic districts of Gion or Higashiyama where English-guided context is provided, is vastly more impactful than just watching it as a spectator.
It completely enforces equality and humility, too. Historically, the entrance to a traditional tea room, the nijiriguchi, is built so low to the ground that everyone, regardless of their social status or military rank, has to physically bow and crawl to enter the space.
Even samurai had to leave their swords outside.
Right. The architecture physically forces you to leave your ego at the door. And by participating, you're forced to match the deliberate, agonizingly slow pace of the host. You cannot rush a tea ceremony.
It physically forces your nervous system to adopt the Kyoto pacing we discussed at the very beginning.
But alongside these highly structured immersions, the guide offers an alternative, unexpectedly liberating method of physical immersion, which is cycling.
Cycling. Yes, this is such a great practical tip.
The text points out that Kyoto is remarkably flat in its central basin, making it highly cycle-friendly. Renting a bicycle near the train station completely alters the range and the rhythm of your exploration.
Because the standard tourist relies almost entirely on the bus network. And in Kyoto, the buses can be agonizingly slow, incredibly crowded, and they're rigidly fixed to specific routes connecting major monuments.
And walking, while it offers intimacy, really limits your geographic scope.
Right. So a bicycle provides a critical middle ground. It grants the traveler actual spatial agency.
You aren't trapped on a bus just staring at traffic. If you see an unmarked, Incredibly narrow residential alleyway you can just turn down it.
You can just go.
You can follow the canal paths near Fushimi or explore the completely non-touristy, quiet residential grids north of the downtown core. You feel the actual breeze, you hear the sounds of a neighborhood waking up.
It breaks you out of the designated tourist corridors.
Exactly. But, executing all of this, the ryokan, the early mornings, the cycling, it requires confronting the actual logistics of time, season, and practical itinerary building.
And the seasonal variation in Kyoto is not merely a shift in weather, it fundamentally alters the aesthetic and the crowd dynamics of the city. The guide breaks down the year really clearly.
So let's start with spring.
Spring, specifically late March through mid-April, is completely dominated by the cherry blossoms. It is a period of extraordinary, delicate visual beauty, which is culturally tied to the concept of transience.
But it comes with a catch.
A huge catch. It is the peak of the peak season. Accommodations must be secured months in advance, and the city basically operates at maximum capacity everywhere.
Then you have autumn, roughly from late October through November, when the maple leaves turn these incredibly violent shades of red and gold.
It's stunning.
The contrast of the crimson leaves against the dark wooden temples is arguably the most iconic imagery of Kyoto. But much like spring, the crowds drawn by the foliage are just massive.
Summer brings intense heat and oppressive humidity, though it also features the Gion Matsuri in July, which is a monumental cultural festival. The crowds are slightly more manageable than in spring or autumn, but the climate is a severe physical challenge.
It's sweltering. And then the guide calls out winter, specifically referring to it as underrated.
Underrated is the perfect word.
The temperatures drop, but the crowds just vanish. You might catch a snowfall that coats the dry landscape gardens in white, completely transforming them into stark, high-contrast, minimalist masterpieces. Accommodation rates plummet, and the city reclaims a deep, freezing quiet.
There is a profound irony built into this seasonal breakdown, though.
Oh, the ultimate paradox of Kyoto. The periods when the city reaches its absolute zenith of visual beauty, the soft pink canopies of spring and the fiery maples of autumn, are precisely the moments when it is hardest to access the quiet, contemplative atmosphere required to actually appreciate that beauty.
The sheer volume of humanity drawn to the aesthetic destroys the peace necessary to absorb it.
Which perfectly reinforces the absolute, non-negotiable nature of the pre-8 a.m. start during those peak seasons. If you want to see the autumn leaves in silence, you must sacrifice your sleep.
The beauty demands a logistical toll.
It really does. So practically speaking, how much time does a traveler actually need to allocate to make this all function? The text is pretty definitive here.
2 to 3 days will allow you to see the major architectural landmarks. But 3 to 5 days is the strong recommendation.
3 to 5 days provides the buffer necessary for a considered pace. It allows time to actually sit in a garden rather than just walking past it.
It accommodates the slow, immersive ryokan stay, and it opens up the wider Kansai region.
Because Kyoto serves as an ideal hub, right? Within 45 minutes on the train, you can reach Nara, Japan's first permanent capital, which is older even than Kyoto, to walk among the free-roaming gear and monumental wooden structures.
And in just 15 minutes by bullet train or 30 minutes by local rail, you are in Osaka.
Osaka is amazing, plunging into this hyper-modern, neon-drenched epicenter of street food and commerce. It is a stark, brilliant contrast to Kyoto's restraint.
The guide also leaves us with a few rapid-fire practicalities that are super important.
Yeah, lay those out for us.
First, you must carry physical Japanese yen, as many of the smaller temples, local markets, and artisans do not process digital payments. Second, you should expect significantly less English signage than you will find in Tokyo.
So rely on your phone more.
Which leads to the third point. Securing a pocket Wi-Fi or an eSIM is absolutely essential because navigating the maze of unmarked Machiya lanes without a digital map is nearly impossible.
But, the most crucial piece of advice in the entire text is not logistical at all, it's philosophical.
The quote about rushing.
Exactly. The author writes, Kyoto is a city that does not reward rushing. Much of what makes the city memorable happens in between. A meal that takes longer than expected, a lane you turn down without a plan, a moment of stillness in a garden that is not in any guidebook.
Happens in between, the negative space of travel.
So what does this all mean? If you try to cram Kyoto into a panicked 8-hour day trip from Tokyo, literally sprinting from the bamboo grove to Genkakuji and rushing back to catch the last bullet train, you have completely defeated the purpose of the city.
You will have physically occupied the space, sure, but you will have missed Kyoto entirely.
A heavily regimented, densely packed itinerary entirely eliminates the possibility of the in-between. If every 15-minute block is scheduled, you cannot linger when a specific temple courtyard unexpectedly captures your attention.
You leave no room for the city to breathe.
We have covered immense ground today. We started by defining Kyoto's horizontal, inward-facing philosophy, contrasting it with the vertical speed of Tokyo.
We mapped the necessity of the dawn alarm clock to experience the preserved lanes of Higashiyama and the mountain trails of Fushimi without the crushing weight of the crowds.
We grounded ourselves in the sensory chaos of Nishiki Market, and we analyzed why submitting your body to the strict domestic architecture of a ryokan, or the precise choreography of a tea ceremony, is literally the only way to truly bridge the gap between spectator and participant.
It is an environment that requires a high degree of mental presence. It asks you to observe the details you normally just filter out.
It is a demanding city, but the rewards are profound. And I want to leave you with a thought to mull over long after this discussion ends.
The real takeaway.
Exactly. The author makes it clear that Kyoto's real magic exists in the unscripted, unhurried pacing, the quiet observation of a single stone, the long, multi-course meal, the unexpected detour down a residential lane.
All those small moments.
Right. So if that intentional, decelerated pacing is what reveals the profound beauty of a city thousands of miles away, what would happen if you didn't wait for the vacation?
Oh, that's interesting.
How might applying that exact same deliberate, observant Kyoto pacing to a regular, ordinary Sunday in your own hometown fundamentally change the way you interact with the place you live every single day?
Slowing down enough to notice the architecture of your own neighborhood. Removing the constant optimization from your own daily routine.
Precisely. Stop rushing past the scenery. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Take care and, find a moment to linger today.